Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, life coach, business consultant, Kundalini yoga, meditation and breathwork teacher, certified conversational hypnotherapist, and top leader with doTERRA essential oils. Welcome to season 3 of the Living Fully Alive podcast. Now we're doing things a little differently this time. This season is an 8-part mini-series called Feel to Heal. And we will be taking a deep dive into all things feelings and emotions. How we respond to what we feel inside ourselves impacts our work, our relationships, our health, our spiritual lives, and everything in between. And when we don't have the skills to properly feel and process our emotions, our repressed anger, shame, resentment, fear, grief, and loneliness ends up driving the bus and hijacking our lives. But I want to show you a better way towards emotional resilience, freedom, and healing. Rest assured, I am still here to guide you on the path of inner transformation and empower you to come back into alignment with your soul, trust your inner voice, and design a life that makes your heart sing. So, let's jump into it. Hey everyone, it is Mary Hyatt, and this is episode number 2 in season 3. This is our mini series, our 8-part series, diving into why we must feel to heal. And I have got to say, I am so grateful for all of you guys that sent me text messages and Instagram DMs about last week's episode and how helpful that was to really slow down and start with thinking about the definition of emotions and looking at it in a really new way that hopefully you left feeling a lot of relief, like you aren't your emotions. Your emotions are a frequency, a vibration. They are not you, and create a little bit of distance so there's less fear around feeling. And so if you haven't listened to that episode, go back, rewind, check out episode number 1. And each week we're just going to be building on this concept of emotional intelligence, emotional awareness. And I can't wait for later in the month for actually not the month, but the series for incredible guest experts to get into all of the deep stuff as it relates to emotions. But I'm really trying in these solo episodes to give you a foundation of understanding a little bit more about the interplay of emotions and our life. And today is another really, I think, powerful conversation to have. And I'm excited that we get to dive in deeper and really start with kind of an obvious truth bomb, which is, surprise, surprise, we are human beings. And because we're human, we have emotions. Like, I love sometimes we think that we are not supposed to experience emotions, that we're supposed to be almost like robots, but it's part of our makeup. It's literally how we are designed to feel. And I think most of us have a lot of experience on attempting not to feel. And perhaps we've never even been taught how to feel. And when we think about emotions, we tend to put them in categories, and we like to think about emotions being good or emotions being bad. And when we think of bad emotions, all of a sudden some of our emotions aren't safe to feel. We're bad for feeling them. We are weak for feeling them, that we should just suck it up, get over it, to hurry up and be more positive. You know, one of the downfalls of sort of positive psychology is there's not a lot of space for feeling some of these more difficult emotions. So everybody is on this pursuit to be happy. Like, I just want more happiness. I want to be happier. And so I think with that, we start avoiding certain emotions, or we're only chasing the good emotions. And we might be okay with, like I said, happiness or joy or pleasure, although that could be a little tricky, that one. But we're maybe not so okay with fear or anxiety or anger or grief. And those emotions are hard. They leave us vulnerable. They leave us exposed. Those emotions are messy. Let's be honest. Like, you don't want to necessarily be crying in the boardroom, and there's some social, like, there's not a lot of acceptance socially to like feel some of these maybe shadow, darker emotions. And it feels heavy. And then that contributes to feeling alone and isolated and like no one gets us or no one sees us, because we don't even know how to, number one, feel it ourselves, but then even try and communicate that with others. And so we numb, we cope, we disconnect, we disassociate, we try to ignore or deny or stuff or suppress what we're feeling. And this is exacerbated even more because, and I want you to kind of think about this for yourself, like in childhood, we're taught from an early age not to feel. Now, whether you are a woman, whether you are a man listening to this, there may be a little bit different messaging that you get like as a little girl or as a little boy. But I feel like the general consensus for most families was like, suck it up, man up, pull it together, get a grip. Tears are for wimps. Go to your room, like take care of yourself. And there wasn't a lot of space for us to experience our emotions. Nobody wants to be around a basket case. Get control of yourself. You're out of control. You're acting crazy. And so for most of us, we haven't truly felt our emotions in a really long time. We aren't familiar with them. We don't have the vocabulary for expressing them. And we have a sense that they're too intense and that they'll take us over. And I talked a lot about that last week. And so instead of feeling a sense of loneliness or feeling some sadness, we hurry up and eat our emotions. We drink our emotions. We overwork our emotions. We shop our emotions. We seek for connection and maybe not super healthy ways to handle what's coming up. And I like to call that buffering. Like when we're unwilling to feel, we start buffering through all the different ways. And it's true for all of us. And I think that it's helpful to look at for a second and reflect on, what are my ways of not feeling? What are the ways that I disconnect from this experience that's happening chemically in my body? How do I disconnect? How do I buffer the intensity of maybe what's happening in my body as a sensation, or maybe the thoughts that are in my mind about how I might be feeling? And for most people, they don't know. They don't know like their patterns. They don't know even what they're feeling moment to moment. So I wanted to share this quick story about a client of mine. So as you guys know, I do individual coaching and I love working with my clients because it shows me almost like this little microcosm of what most people are dealing with in their lives, because I end up having a lot of the same conversations. And I'm working with women who are like really kicking ass in their lives. Like they are really high achievers. They are successful. They are hungry for contributing and offering more and doing more. And they really want to have a full, great life. And of course, they're coming to coaching to figure out what's blocking them from getting to the next step of their life. And so I was working with this one woman last year, and she is she's a VP of a manufacturing company, and she works mostly with men. Okay. So she's one of the only females in the office. And she came to me because she was really exhausted and burnt out. Like that's usually how it presents itself. Like people are in some form of burnout. And so she wanted to A, kind of fix that problem, and B, get more connected to her femininity and find ways to experience pleasure again. She was really disconnected from any kind of joy in her life, any kind of pleasure or play. And so she came to me like leading this team, and she had a lot of issues with managing her team, being a vice president. So one of the first things that we did was we started slowing down to do a check-in. Every time we got on a session, we would check in and I would walk her through a guided visualization, kind of meditation tune in to check in with how she was feeling. And at the beginning, this was like an impossible task. Like we would do this for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and she literally could not connect to the emotional part of herself. Every time we would get done, I'd say, okay, what showed up? What came up? What were you feeling? And she was like, I just don't know. I just feel stressed. I just feel overwhelmed. And every single time her answer was overwhelmed or stressed. And I know that those two emotions, stressed and overwhelmed, are almost like secondary emotions or buffer emotions. And there usually is a deeper emotional root. And because those are kind of socially acceptable words to use for describing our emotions, and when we have a limited vocabulary, those end up being the go-to, like anxious, stressed, or overwhelmed. So one of the things that we found out through coaching is that she also had a really hard time feeling certain emotions. And so I gave her a couple more options to choose from. And it was a really small list. We'll go over that here in a second. It was like 8 different emotions. And so she started checking in our sessions with shame and anger. And what was fascinating is that as we peeled back the layers, anger was like a really threatening emotion for her. She felt like she, in her family of origin, was not allowed to be angry. Like literally, like that was an emotion that she could not express. She could not feel. There was a lot of shame around being angry. Even though her dad was an alcoholic, he had a lot of rage. He had a lot of anger. And it was almost like, okay, it was fine for him to feel that, but nobody else in the family could feel anger. So as we started looking at her problems at work, one of the things that we realized is she was really angry. And part of why she was really angry was because she didn't have good boundaries. And then she had this shame of feeling like she wasn't doing enough. And so she grew up in a family where, number one, emotions were seen as weak, and she needed to sort of channel this masculine energy to show up in the workplace. And she was trying to earn by doing and hustling and grinding and overproducing. She was trying to earn acceptance and love. So she truly was burnt out. She truly was exhausted. She truly was overwhelmed and stressed. But underneath of it, the underbelly was this need for showing up beyond her limits, like giving and giving and giving, even when she was tired. And so she was feeling a lot of resentment. She was feeling a lot of anger, but she also had shame because she felt like she shouldn't be angry or resentful, right? Because there was no permission in her family granted to feel that emotion. So what was really beautiful about this is as we slowed down to name these emotions, to get in touch with these emotions, it did really 2 things. It helped her internally identify this misbelief that she was holding, this limiting belief that she was holding inside of herself, that she had to earn love by achievement. So we got to the root. And then these emotions, this anger and this shame, also really helped motivate her to set appropriate boundaries at work and give her schedule some more margin so that she could replenish, so that she could begin to take care of herself in a more powerful way. So just by slowing down and being able to name these emotions, increasing her vocabulary for what she was feeling, it like solved a huge problem in her work life and ultimately gave her all this white space and permission to prioritize some self-care. So it's really cool. So giving ourselves the permission to feel the rainbow of emotions as human beings is really, really important, because our relationship to life will always mirror our relationship to our feelings. Hey there, real quick. If you are at all feeling extra overwhelmed or exhausted by social media, or simply don't have energy to read through any more emails, believe me, I get it. That's why I want to invite you to connect with me over text. I send out weekly affirmations, words of encouragement, meditations, And of course, you'll be the first to know about any upcoming events or when I publish a new podcast episode. Plus, it's really me, so it's super easy. Just text 615-930-3522 or go to maryhyatt.com/text. maryhyatt.com/text. All right, back to our podcast episode. When we open up to recognizing our emotions, we begin to relate to our lives in like a totally new way. And that's why I feel like we've got to begin to have this human experience that includes this range of emotions, this rainbow of emotions. And when we do that, I think it's important to do that because I see it doing a few things. Number one, it gives us permission to be like totally human and not compartmentalized and not a robot. So that's a gift. That's a good thing. And then two, it increases our self-awareness. And then we're not a victim to our emotions. Then we're no longer in these patterns of stress and burnout or anxiety or anger or shame. All of a sudden we're like, oh, this is showing up. What's going on? What's below the surface? So it increases our self-awareness and it makes sure that we're not bottling up or stuffing our emotions where, they're going to come out sideways. So I think that's a really beautiful piece. And then lastly, when we allow ourselves to feel this rainbow of emotions, all of a sudden it helps point to and helps us identify what is asking for attention in any given moment. Like what is showing up? What is feedback for our lives that we need to pay attention to, that data that can help us really stay in alignment, that can help us really stay connected to the truest parts of ourselves. So I want to walk you through 5 ways that we can really enter into this rainbow experience, 5 ways that we can increase our, I should say 5 ways that we can stretch ourselves to feel the rainbow of emotions. So the first way that we can really stretch ourselves to feel this rainbow of emotions is to increase our emotional vocabulary. Increase our emotional vocabulary. If you've ever been to therapy, this may be like one of the first things that therapists will work on with you is, I know that for me, and let me just say, I have spent a PhD level amount of money on therapy. Like I'm sure I've spent probably like $100,000 by now. I started doing therapy when I was 13 years old. I had such intense anxiety, like almost debilitating social anxiety as a teenager. And so I was the second person in my family to start getting therapy, and it was really, really helpful. And one of the things that she handed me when I walked into her office in the first several weeks that we worked together was this list of descriptive words for emotions. Now, for most people, their emotional vocabulary is like happy, sad, mad. I don't know, like not more than that, or stressed, overwhelmed, or anxious, right? So we have a limited vocabulary because if you think about it, nobody is taking you through the school of emotional intelligence and saying, okay, here's all the options that you can feel. And let's begin to tap in and see what those are inside of you, how you can relate to them, what they feel like in the body. No, nobody's teaching that. So if you've been to therapy, if you've ever looked at that list and you're like, oh my God, there's like literally hundreds of emotional experiences to be had. And because we're so limited in our vocabulary, it limits us in life. So imagine learning a new language like Spanish. And at the beginning, as you know, it's like you've got your little flashcard. You're only, maybe fluent with 20 words. You can ask for the bathroom. You can maybe have a drink order or a food order, and that's about it. But as you become more versed and you practice your Spanish, your vocabulary increases. You start learning new words. You start being able to construct full sentences. And what's so incredible about that is that you can express yourself in a more powerful way. And you can ask for what you need. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to a foreign country where you don't speak the language and you have a real need, like whatever it might be. And you're like, oh my God, I literally cannot communicate this, which means there's a little panic. There's a little fear around, I'm not going to get that need met because I literally cannot ask for it because I don't have the words. And the same thing is true for our emotions. Like once we understand the nuances of what it is that we're feeling, not only are we able to ask for what we need, right? When we feel something, there's a next step to the process of feeling this, like, what does that emotion need? What do we need to soothe that, or to feel safe, or to feel more grounded, right? Like that can only come, meeting that need can only come when we know what actually is going on. And then also we can express them. Like if we have a rainbow of emotions to choose from, a whole laundry list to choose from, like we can express ourselves. Because I don't know if somebody's ever asked you like, hey, how do you feel? Are you feeling mad? And there's some discomfort in your body, but it's like frustrating because you're like, no, I'm not mad, but like, ugh, like you can't find the words. It's like, you're having like a frustrating experience, but it's not quite mad, or maybe you're not quite angry. But maybe you feel exacerbated. Maybe you feel impatient. Maybe you feel irked. Maybe you feel annoyed. But when you don't have those options in your brain, it's like, it's frustrating. You can't express yourself. You can't vocalize it. And part of what our emotions need in order to move through them, process them through our body, where we're not stuffing them, we're not suppressing them, is to be able to name them. And so that ability to increase our self-awareness helps us to not feel disconnected, to not feel lost, but gives us this sense of power. Like learning a language is power. And so I want you to think about, and this, I would like literally Google this, like emotional vocabulary, and like look up all the emotions that are available out there for you and print that out and have that around you when you start to want to identify what you're feeling. Because for example, for the word refreshed, like I'm feeling refreshed. That's very different than feeling happy. That's very different than feeling joy. Like feeling refreshed, feeling enlivened, feeling rejuvenated, feeling renewed, restored, revived, rested. Like each one of those feels a little bit different. Each one of those helps us go, yeah, this is what I'm feeling. Like all of a sudden we can own it in a deeper way. Or if you think about the emotion of disconnection, like I'm feeling disconnected versus alienated or aloof or apathetic or bored or lonely or distracted or numb or withdrawn or indifferent. See, all these little nuances to emotions all of a sudden give ourselves this power to express ourselves more clearly, more effectively, more efficiently. So I love thinking about giving ourselves this challenge to increase our emotional vocabulary. Now, when I work with clients, because that can feel maybe a little overwhelming, it's like if you're moving from 3 emotions to 100 emotions, it's like, oh, that's a lot. So I start with 8. And this is work that I've done with and learned from an author and psychologist, Chip Dodd. You might be familiar with him. And he has 8 core emotions. Now, I am bringing on a guest expert later in the series to really talk about these 8 emotions. So I'll dive into this deeper. But the 8 core emotions, and this is again really easy to start with, and you just check in and you go, okay, which of these 8 emotions am I feeling right now in this moment? Hurt, lonely, sad, anger, fear, shame, guilt, and glad. Hurt, lonely, sad, anger, fear, shame, guilt, and glad. And that's really helpful because I can have a moment where maybe I'm getting really, really triggered by something and I'm lashing out. And all of a sudden, when I pause to go check in, what am I feeling? And it's like, oh, I'm feeling shame right now. And so I'm trying to push this person away because I don't want to be rejected. So I'm going to reject them first so they don't reject me. But if we look at what that is fueled by, that action, that behavior, it's shame. It's the emotion of shame. It's like, oh my gosh. So increasing our emotional vocabulary is really, really helpful in creating that pause between the stimulus and the response before we react. It's like, ooh, what am I feeling? Hurt, lonely, sad, anger, fear, guilt, shame, glad. So I encourage you even to, in this moment, to do that. Like, just check in. What is it that you are feeling? If you could pick from one of those 8, what are you feeling? And sometimes you might want to just like pause this podcast and take a couple deep breaths and do that. And we're going to walk through in a later episode, like actually how to feel your emotions. So it's like a little teaser for that episode. But that is the first way that we can begin to stretch our ability to feel the rainbow of emotions. So the second way is to accept our emotional fluidity. I love this because I was on Zoloft for like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years because of all my anxiety and this journey through anxiety. And there's a time and a place for that. So not knocking it. But for me, I learned, it was a very formative age that I was on that medication. I thought to be a healthy human being, to be psychologically, emotionally healthy, that I should have like almost flatlined emotions. Like I shouldn't have highs. I shouldn't have lows. Like I should be like a steady stream that was just like flatlined. Like that was health for me. And so anytime I felt a rush of emotion, an urge, a intensity of an emotion, a depth of an emotion, it scared me. I was like, ooh, this is not healthy. Like I labeled that as unhealthy. And when I got off that medication and I started to feel again for the first time in a long time, and I began to trust my emotions more in my relationship to them and my relationship to processing them, I realized that it is like an ebb and a flow. I mean, it is a wave. It's fluid. Our emotions are fluid. You think about the ocean. I was just at the beach. I was there speaking at an event for women about feeling their emotions and connecting to their self. And one of the things that I love to do is acknowledge how every day when you show up to the beach, the water is different. The beach is different. Like one day the water was super clear, super calm, very placid. The next day there were waves. It was a little bit rougher. There was sea life. There were these really big jellyfish. And then, it varies from day to day. And literally, if you live by the water, you know this. If you live by the ocean, you get this, that literally the ocean changes every single day. And our emotions are like water. They are fluid. They have motion. They have movement. There's ups, there's down, there's waves, there's peaks, there's valleys. I was with my friend Allie Fallon at the beach. She joined me and we were just talking about all this as we do and have these deep conversations. And she said that one of her dear friends, Don Miller, calls it weather patterns, that our emotions are like weather patterns. And I was like, yes, like sometimes you look at your 10-day forecasts, and I wish we could do this with emotions, but it's like, yeah, you're going to have cloudy days. You're going to have rainy days. You're going to have sunny days. You're going to have windy days and every little nuanced thing in between. And that can even go like moment by moment, not even day by day, but like hour by hour. And as we learned last week, the normal duration of any emotion is 90 seconds. 90 seconds. So like, think about do the math, however many 90 seconds are in a day that you're awake. You have the opportunity to have a lot of emotions. So we have to accept that emotions are fluid. There's an ebb and a flow, and that's nothing that means that we're unhealthy. It doesn't mean that we're unstable. It doesn't mean that we are sick. It doesn't mean that we are crazy. That is part of feeling the rainbow of emotions and being human, is that there will be some movement to it. So the third way that we can embrace and kind of stretch ourselves to feel more of this rainbow of emotions is to find a space of neutrality. This was really, really important in my learning of increasing my emotional intelligence, is that we have this misunderstanding that there are good and bad emotions. There are sanctioned and unsanctioned emotions. And again, this can have a lot to do with your family of origin and what was accepted in your family of origin, but also just our culture and our society. There are more appropriate emotions and there are less appropriate emotions that we have tolerance for. And so we learn from a really early age, like feel this, don't feel this, feel more of this and less of this. And when we think about some of those like quote unquote, what we would label bad emotions, those emotions are challenging, right? Like they can be unpleasant, they can cause discomfort, they can be hard, they can hurt for a time. But that doesn't make them bad or wrong. It doesn't make you weak to feel them. And so we've got to sort of get out of this polarity of good emotions and bad emotions and come into the middle of the space of neutrality. Emotions just are. We have a lot of them. They differ. Some are easier to feel and some are harder to feel. But as Brene Brown says, when we numb the dark, we numb the light. And so when we have these certain emotions that we're unwilling to feel because we think they're bad, those dark emotions, it closes the door for us to be able to feel the light, to feel the joy, the happiness, the what we consider good emotions. When we numb the dark, we numb the light. And so as we have grown up attaching morality almost to our emotions, it gets tricky. We've got to unlearn some of that and allow ourselves to feel all emotions and really without judgment, meet them with neutrality, really say like, okay, if I didn't have to be critiquing this or judging this or making an assumption about me because I'm feeling this, and I could just say, this is just an emotion. What is it here to teach me? What is it here to tell me? What is it inviting me into? Meeting it with compassion, with opening up a little bit more to it, we can really hear what it is trying to tell us, the need that is asking to be met, the wound in us that needs some attention. There really is value in each emotion. There is a gift with every feeling. So for example, like anger, when it's, not rage, when it's like healthy, anger can move us into action. It can help us create stronger boundaries. Like my client that I was sharing with you earlier, guilt can help us get clear on our values. It can help us shift and course correct. Anxiety can show us where we are out of alignment or illuminate a deeper fear that needs to feel safe or soothed. Feeling jealous, that's one thing that jealous people really don't enjoy feeling because they judge themselves for feeling that way. But jealousy can put us in touch with what it is that we're longing for, what we feel like is missing in our lives. Loneliness, for example, like loneliness can invite us into connection. It can invite us into more intimacy. And so each emotion really is super helpful. Each emotion has an invitation to it. And so once we can approach emotions as neutral, neither bad nor good, it opens us up to the gift of these emotions. So in part of your reflection, because you guys know, I always, as a coach, I'm always like, okay, how can we make this more practical? Like, think about like, what emotions do you have some resistance to? What emotions feel like they might be on your bad list? Like if you were to like draw two circles and one was good and one was bad, what emotions have you either not been allowed to feel, you weren't given permission to feel, emotions that feel like if you felt them, it meant you were weak or sinful or bad? Even some of the good emotions people think are bad, like pleasure. Oh God, I can't feel desire. I can't feel pleasure, right? I can't feel that wave of energy inside of me because that's sinful, right? So we have, again, this whole circle of bad emotions and a whole circle of good emotions. So just take stock, just take inventory of what that is for you. And this is where, if we were working together in a coaching experience, like there would be a process of learning how to create some tolerance for those bad emotions, to start opening the door to feeling those a little bit incrementally at a time, to where you become more comfortable experiencing the discomfort of some of these bad emotions, quote unquote bad, and really see the gift in it and really begin to like thank those emotions and create space for them. And again, coming back to that place of neutrality. So take inventory. What judgments do you have on certain emotions? What have you labeled as good and bad? Just upping that level of self-awareness, which I love to do. So our fourth way that we can, again, stretch ourselves to feel more is to appreciate contrast and polarity. I love talking about this one. So contrast is like, if we only felt good emotions, it would rob us of the full experience of them if we didn't have the contrast of feeling some of these harder emotions. Like, how much sweeter is joy after a long period of grief? Or how precious and how grateful are we for moments of peace when we've been under like severe stress and survival? The contrast of this light and this dark, this yin to the yang, is what gives us an appreciation for the times that feel easier or happier. And so I have a friend who just moved here from California and from Southern California. And she's been like texting me all the time. She's like, Mary, you did not warn me about the weather of Tennessee, because in California, you know, it's like gorgeous all the time. It's 75 degrees, pretty much sunny the majority of the time. And in Nashville, we have 4 seasons. We have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And so she got here in the winter, and I kept telling her, I promise it gets better. I promise it gets better. Like, spring is coming. And she was like, this is freaking miserable. Like, it's gray, it's cold. I'm not used to this. But then when spring rolled around, she was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And we were meeting up for hikes and it was so great. And then summer rolled around. And if you've ever been to Nashville in the dead of summer, it is super hot. It is super humid. You want to be inside in your air conditioning. And so we've been in that, you know, just recently. And she's like, this is miserable. Oh my God. I've never like, you know, had to deal with this where I walk outside and I'm like sweating instantaneously. And I'm like, don't worry. It gets better. It gets better. I promise when fall comes, you will appreciate it so much better. It will be amazing. You will cherish it in a way that you've never cherished it before in your life. And it's so true. And so we just had some cooler weather last week and she was like, woohoo, like this is awesome, you know? And so to me, it's like, there's the seasons of our emotions. There's that polarity, the contrast of having the winter lets us rejoice and celebrate in the spring. And I think it's important to remember too, that the goal of life is not to be happy 100% of the time. Like, we would not be able to even appreciate seasons of happiness or ease without a little contrast of our emotions. Like, it wouldn't feel so good if we felt it all the time. You kind of become immune to it. We need the variety. And to be human means that we are going to experience a spectrum of emotions. We are going to feel discomfort. We are going to feel fear. We are going to feel anxiety and anger and hurt and jealousy. And we've got to kind of have a little come to Jesus moment, as we say in the South, that about 50% of the time, we're going to be feeling uncomfortable emotions. Just take that in for a minute, because I think the illusion is like, we're going to be happy all the time. And when we're happy all the time, we finally made it. We've figured it out. But in reality, about 50% of our lives are going to be moments of fear. We're going to be out of our comfort zone. We're going to be pushing ourselves. Like, if you are pursuing a path of growth, you are going to feel some of those more unpleasant emotions. And if you're human and life is happening to you, tragedy is happening to you, hard things are happening, challenges, that is normal. It does not mean that you have done something wrong. It doesn't mean that you're a defect, that you can't be happy. Like, that's an unrealistic expectation. So when we can appreciate this contrast and this polarity, this yin, this yang, this, you know, negative to the positive energy, it creates this sweetness of like, it all has its place. It all has its meaning, and it's necessary in order to embrace and live life fully. Okay. So last way, and then we're going to wrap it up, is that we've got to be willing to hold multiple emotions at once. So if we're going to stretch ourselves to feel more, to feel this rainbow of emotions, we've got to be willing to hold multiple emotions at once. This is an interesting concept that there is no like rule that says you have to do, if you're sad or if you feel like you have a lot of anxiety, that you can't also experience happiness at the same time, or that you can't feel fear even in the midst of being excited. So there's no one or the other. There are multiple emotional experiences to be had all at once. So I like to think of this about the stages of grief. So I feel like I'm telling a lot of stories on this episode. So that we're just doing that. But I was just thinking about grief, and I was thinking about a season of my life where I lost my nephew, who I was the caretaker of. Some of y'all know that story. He was 2 years old when he got diagnosed with neuroblastoma, and my ex-husband and I were caretaking him for 2 years before he passed. We were in the hospital. We shaved his head. We were there for all of these major life moments. And I was 20 years old when he got diagnosed. I was newly married, a couple months after marriage. And it was unimaginable trauma, that happened in our lives. And quite honestly, we never really recovered from. I certainly didn't. And I say that in our marriage, obviously I've done a lot of work around it now and really have processed through that, but I still feel that grief from time to time. Obviously, like it still will hit me out of the blue on anniversaries of his birthday or of his death. I mean, it's like, as you know, if you've lost anybody, like the grief never, ever, ever leaves. But I remember at the time, and I didn't have a lot of experience with grief because I was super young. I didn't have a lot of life experience. They walk you through the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And I remember thinking it was going to be a real linear process. Like I would feel the denial first, or, whatever. I would feel the anger, then I would feel the bargaining, then the depression, and then the acceptance. But what I realized was that grief is so messy. Like you can feel it all the time. There's no such thing as grief being linear. It is like you might skip stages. You might be in 3 stages at once. It might be, the last one first before you feel anger. Like it's not linear, and our emotions are the same way. We can feel joy next to sadness. We can feel anger next to peace. We're not crazy for holding lots of emotions. Like I feel like COVID is a great example of this. Like you can feel fear and be hopeful. You can feel uncertain and feel confident. Like we can experience multiple things at once. So I just kind of wanted to share that because I think it's important if we're going to open ourselves up to feeling more, just sort of knowing like, okay, that may be part of the process. So ultimately, when we think about slowing down and feeling more, right? This whole series is about feeling to heal, to stretch ourselves more, to be like my client and slowly but surely identify what's happening inside of ourselves, noticing the mirror of our lives to our emotional life inside. We've got to increase our emotional vocabulary, accept that emotions are fluid, accept our emotional fluidity, find a space of neutrality where we can meet our emotions with acceptance. We have to appreciate the contrast, the polarity of emotions. And lastly, to be willing to hold multiple emotions at once. This to me is what it means to be fully alive. Like the podcast is to live fully alive. And to me, to be fully alive means that we feel deeply, that we have access to the rainbow of emotions. It means that we have a human experience, that we can get honest with where we are in our life and see our emotions as feedback and see where we need to shift, what we need to change, what needs more loving, what needs more attention. And ultimately, there's no need to resist or resent certain emotions, that there's space for all of it. And we'll walk through in future episodes of the series, like how to do that. what it looks like when you've had trauma in your life, how to create some nervous system tolerance for emotional experiences. But I think it starts with kind of getting even more clear of it's a rainbow. It's fluid, it's seasonal, it's up, it's down, it's all over the place. And that means you're normal. That means you're human. It's not a flatline experience. It's not 100% happiness all the time. So hopefully that is illuminating and creating some light around just what it means to feel all of these emotions. And if this was helpful, if this resonated with you, please send me a DM on Instagram, Mary G. Hyatt. Send me a text. If you aren't texting with me, make sure to do that. Go ahead. And I think there's a little clip in this already. Go back, listen to that. Text me if you haven't already. Share your insights with me. Tag me on Instagram and share the episode so that other people can see it. And the next thing that's coming after this is a guided meditation. So next week that will come out. And then the following week we'll have a new episode 3, new episode 3. So be on the lookout for that. So y'all, sending you so much light, sending you so much love, and hope you enjoy feeling a little bit more. Bye. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it to your Instagram stories and tag me at Mary G. Hyatt. Or, of course, share it with a dear friend, sister, or colleague. I think we could all use a little more emotional awareness, don't you think? Plus, if you haven't already subscribed to the Living Fully Alive podcast, make sure to do that now so you don't miss out on any of my episodes or guided meditations. All right. Thanks, y'all, and see you next time.